So when that's something I think about a lot. Not, of course, like in an academic sense, but like the meaning of like independent and sort of indie music, and you're talking about just being independent is kind of void of certain powers that be, either a label or some sort of tech app, be it Spotify or even Bandcamp. Right? Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I think that, it's super interesting. Like, Bandcamp has come up in a lot of conversations because people always ask me like how I listen to music, and I always have to kind of like give this huge spiel because Bandcamp is one of the main ways that I listen to music, but it's certainly not like, it's deserving of its own sort of like critique and questioning, especially as it's like changed hands between different corporate owners in recent years and all this like union busting stuff. But it's kind of like the way some people are like sort of trapped in the Spotify bubble. Like I'm like kind of like some other people a little bit like trapped in the Bandcamp bubble. And the reality is like as it stands, it's a model that makes a lot more sense for most independent musicians than streaming. But yeah, always trying to, diversify where I get my music from and buy music directly from artists like outside of these ecosystems and directly from them at their shows and things like that when possible. But yeah, I think that, if historically independence has meant like, the early definition of the phrase when it like emerged had to do with independence from the major record labels. I think like today maybe it also involves grappling with these platforms as well. And I think, something that's really interesting to me is when you think back on like the history of independent music, like independent scenes always have kind of, defined themselves in as alternatives to the major labels, but they also have always kind of there's like other values that they've represented too. Like independent labels serve musicians that are operating on a smaller scale. It's like how I always talk about is like one of the values of like independent music scenes also is supporting small scale cultural production. And that is much different than like the type of music that is served by the streaming status quo, which is like music that generates like as many streams as possible. Like streaming is set up to benefit music that scales up, whereas like independent music has historically been more about like how do you support music. I mean, some versions of independent music is also vast and different people have different goals, but like part of it is like how do you support music operating on a smaller scale. And then I think also like independent music scenes, in addition to, those things, also there's been like a focus on localism. So things that I often think about are like when you're like thinking about streaming or like alternatives to streaming, it's not just like how do you support independent music outside of these like really consolidated corporate platforms, but also like how do you use the digital tools to support small scale cultural production, to support like localism in music and these things that have historically been really important in independent music.